Someday, you'd like to visit the Holy Land, or maybe Iceland, or maybe the Galapagos Islands. She has big ambitions for travel later on. She is a graduate of Northridge High School, Indiana University Bloomington, the Associated Mennonite Biblical Seminary. We know her husband, Bob. Bob works in the area of development for the Mennonite Seminary. And they have a 19-year-old, Josiah, who's attending Ball State, and Mira, who's a senior at Bethany High School. Highlights of her ministry include visiting and working with others who also offer pastoral care. She supervises some of the visitors. We ask Pamela to do hard things. She's with us in illness, even death and bereavement. She'll be joining us in just a minute. While we wait for her to arrive, let's think a little bit about the kind of losses that we have in our lives and what are some ways in which our church community can address those, as well as our pastors who are part of our resource. She'll be joining us in just a minute. Welcome, Pamela. I gave you an introduction, so please take that by faith that you have been introduced.
Sorry about that. I am sharing a little story with you from a book which I left on the coffee table at home, and I didn't feel like I could leave before Madeline shared what she was sharing. Can you hear me okay? Am I all right? Well, thank you so much for having me today. Appreciate the invitation and this opportunity. And I don't think you want to hear children's time again, so but I am going to piggyback a little bit on what I was sharing in children's time, as I would like to begin with some verses from a lament psalm, and I'll say more about this as I go along today. But the topic, as I understand it, is for today is spiritual resources for coping with losses. And I find the Psalms to be a significant resource to us as we think about this. And I was reminded of this particular psalm when I reread Henry Nouwen and Walter Gaffney's book. It's called Aging, the Fulfillment of Life. I'm drawing a good deal from this as I share with you today. And I just find this, it's a little book, but it's a treasure. It's over 50 years old, but a lot of it is timeless wisdom and guidance. So here are some verses from Psalm 31. Have mercy on me, Lord, because I am depressed. My vision fails because of my grief, as do my spirit and my body. My life is consumed with sadness. My years are consumed with groaning. Strength fails me because of my suffering. My bones dry up. I'm a joke to all my enemies, still worse to my neighbors. I scare my friends, and whoever sees me in the streets runs away. I am forgotten, like I'm dead, completely out of mind. I'm like a piece of pottery destroyed. I know this paints a fairly bleak picture, but don't worry, I won't leave you there. I know, Merle talked a lot today about how we can be left hanging sometimes, but I'll try not to leave you hanging, and I know God won't leave you hanging. I share these verses because it captures some of what people feel as they face losses associated with aging, feeling discarded, feeling devalued, or without value when our society overall places value on what we can do, what we can produce, what we can achieve, what we can have, what we can keep. And also, people may feel discouraged, lonely, and even depressed or anxious. But this is not the value that we have, particularly as we look through the lens of faith and within the love of our faith community. You are not to be discarded or to be without value. Instead, you are teachers and prophets. Is this not working very well? Okay, better. Thank you. Teachers and prophets, story keepers and storytellers, and those of us who are aging, we're all aging from birth throughout our lives, right? But those who are in the upper ages show us warning signs and struggles, yes, but also hopes and possibilities, light and wisdom. So these authors, Henry Nouwen and Walter Gaffney, alongside my experience in my family and also in my work, affirm that aging is not just about darkness and loss or decay and loss, but it is also and even more about growth, maturity, and fulfillment. And I'm going to share a couple of things that I hope illustrate this well. And I feel like I'm preaching to the choir here, but even so, take whatever you can from this. The first thing I will share is an old Balinese legend that Nouwen and Gaffney tell, and it goes like this. It is said that once upon a time, the people of a remote mountain village used to sacrifice their old men. A day came when there was not a single old man left, and the traditions were lost. They wanted to build a great house for the meetings of the assembly, but when they came to look at the tree trunks that had been cut for that purpose, no one could tell the top from the bottom. If the timber were placed the wrong way up, it would set off a series of disasters. A young man said that if they promised never to sacrifice the old men anymore, he would be able to find a solution. They promised. He brought out his grandfather, whom he had hidden, and the old man taught the community to tell the top from bottom. And the second illustration I'll share is the concluding parts of Psalm 31. How great is the goodness that you've reserved for those who honor you, that you commit to those who take refuge in you in the sight of everyone. You hide them in the shelter of your wings, safe from human scheming. You conceal them in a shelter safe from accusing tongues. Bless the Lord, because he has wondrously revealed his faithful love to me when I was like a city under siege. When I was panicked, I said, I'm cut off from your eyes. But you heard my request for mercy when I cried out to you for help. All you who are faithful, love the Lord. The Lord protects those who are loyal, but he pays the proud back to the fullest degree. All who wait for the Lord, be strong and let your heart take courage. So if you were in the service this morning, you heard Merle talk a little bit about loyalty to God and some of the costs that come with that. And but here in Psalm 31, we're not left hanging like we are with Psalm 44. I share these two examples, the Balinese legend and these verses from Psalm 31, not to be dismissive of the very real losses that are a part of aging. Some of those that Vic shared with me when he contacted me about sharing today include loss of hearing, loss of vision, mobility, lowered energy levels, the loss of friends due to their dying, to loss of peers. That's just to name a few. And some of you have lost dear loved ones. So as I hold up these words of hope and light, fulfillment and promise, this does not erase the reality of the losses. But hopefully it helps to see the wider and the bigger and the deeper picture and provide some balance and encouragement. Sometimes we just see what's right here, and we need to see the bigger picture. So the rest of the time today, and I don't know what time you are hoping to stop today, so let me give me a ballpark, because I don't want to keep you here. 10 minutes. Okay. All right. All right. So what I'll do is just summarize a bit of what I would like to offer as a spiritual toolbox, if you will, to help us think about how to cope with some of these losses. And really, we all face loss as a part of our human experience. And I have no doubt that many or most of you already have your tool belts strapped on, or you're carrying around a fairly full toolbox already, but perhaps you might find some helpful reminders. And I'm gonna pass these out. I did 40 of these, so maybe some of you can share. So these are not in order of importance or any particular order, but because I started with scripture, I started with scripture on here. So I've already talked about the Psalms and their importance, because they can give us words to express things that we can't always find on our own, and also the permission to cry out to God. I'm also gonna make these guys exercise a little bit more, because I have a real gift, and some of you may have this already. This is a pamphlet regarding scripture from our dear Ron Kennel, who put this together, I think during his pastoral work. It's called For Comfort and Guidance. And so I have these. Oh my. Okay. All right. I'm trying here. Sorry. So if you want to pass these around as well. Ron shares in this that it's one person's perspective on scripture and what might be helpful at different times. But as you folks probably know, if you've known Ron, he was a walking encyclopedia of scripture. So I hope you find this a helpful part of your toolbox. Another part I'd like to note about scripture is that it's important to share meaningful scripture with younger generations. This is a way of sharing your wisdom and experience. And it's also a way of you remembering and affirming your faith over and over again. So, like the times when we have the first graders with their Bibles, first or second graders, and we mark those scriptures, or we mark in other in the youth songbooks. Those things are really important, not just for passing that on, but for you to remember and affirm what has been important and meaningful to you. So the next tool would be prayer. And I share a quote here that comes from Evelyn Kreider. And I was visiting her. I think she was 102 at the time. She died at age 103. But in that last year of life, especially, she slowed down quite a bit. And I remember visiting her, and she was laying on her couch, and which, if you knew Evelyn, she was pretty on the go. But she was laying on her couch, very weak. But she said to me, "As long as I can pray, I'm not without a vocation." And I will never forget that, because that's important for us to remember. And I hold that alongside knowing that my maternal grandmother would tell me that every night she prayed for her children and all of her grandchildren, which was a lot every night. And she was very crippled with arthritis and could not be out and active as much as she would like to be, but she could pray. And sometimes we might feel that that is not a significant contribution, but it is. You are enfolding others in prayer. So we have our personal prayers, but then intercessory prayer is another thing that helps us to see that bigger picture, that wider and deeper picture. It helps us get outside of ourselves when we hear the concerns of others and the struggles of others. It also, we can sometimes hear the affinity and what's going on in our lives paralleling the lives of others. So the next thing I would suggest in your toolbox would be, it really goes along with prayer, is naming what is. Naming what is difficult, naming what is grieving, and making space for that grief is important. We don't want to just gloss over the difficulties of losses. And I suggest here the prayer of Examen. How many of you have heard of Examen prayer before? A few of you. So this is a way of holding our joys and our disappointments, our gratitude along with our grief, holding those both together. And as we practice that in our lives on a daily or weekly, monthly, or seasonal, in a seasonal way, this builds those abilities to cope with the losses. So the Genesis youth group, am I already out of time? Okay. I hear an alarm going off. So the Genesis youth group starts each Sunday school class with highs, lows, and buffaloes, which is a way of Examen prayer. It's naming what has been a highlight, what has been a connecting point with God, what has been a low place of their week, what's been disappointing, where have they felt disconnected or alone. And then buffaloes are just it's specific to youth, especially because they have to make it a little more interesting, I guess, are just something surprising. Just surprising or random. So how has life or God surprised you this week? And as we hold those together, it is helping to do what Merle was talking about in living in contentment and peace alongside the struggle and the grief. And I know some of you probably were at the service of gratitude and grief, and that was a way of us working at doing that corporately. So I'm gonna leave you with, you can read through the other pieces of this, and but one thing I want to just mention under the part about family is, treasuring your time with family, whether that's your biological family or your chosen family or your faith family, but treasuring those times and soaking that in and making decisions when you still have agency to do so, not waiting until a crisis occurs or an emergency when then emotions are really high and there's maybe pressure of time. But letting your wishes be known to your family members and other loved ones is so important. And I know those are difficult conversations to have, but they're crucial conversations. And if nothing else, at least let your loved ones know what would be a picture of what dignity looks like for you, of what they can do to maintain your dignity, what kind of care you would like. And alongside that, if you don't do anything else with your documents and end of life planning, please choose a healthcare representative so that someone beside you, if you aren't able, can represent your healthcare decisions. So should we leave it there? Or do you want to have a very brief two questions? Two questions. Okay. You've got it all figured out, huh? Phyllis has a question, I think, or a comment.
I just am looking at the very bottom of the page,
Mhm.
more on examen prayer.
Examen.
Yeah, can
Mhm.
you briefly explain what?
So I just gave one example of how to use the examen prayer, and this comes from the Jesuit Church. The examen prayer comes from Saint Ignatius of Loyola, and so this is one example of how to work at that. Another example would be what I shared about the highs and lows. But you might frame that with where did I see God today? Where did I feel God's absence? So holding those two together, whether it's on a daily or weekly or monthly basis, if you're doing that less often than weekly, it might be like that you're taking a retreat time and then you're reflecting back on your month. What has happened? What have you experienced in that time? Does that help a little bit? Okay, okay. One thing I failed to mention is that I think this book by April Yamasaki is also very helpful. Sacred Pauses, which it it's spiritual practices for personal renewal. And I will just rattle off the table of contents and it will give you more ideas for your toolbox. Creating space, slowing down, becoming quiet, engaging scripture, praying it like it is, getting outside, being alone without being lonely. So the idea of practicing solitude as a way of working that muscle so that when that's sort of forced upon you, that you're less uncomfortable. Valuing relationships, giving, praying the Lord's Prayer, making music, having fun, paying attention, confessing, living simply, ending well. So, Sacred Pauses by April Yamasaki. One more question.
Thank you, Pamela.
Mm-hmm.
Another way of saying thank you to loved ones, I think, would be to leave a written legacy. We as seniors are still able to write on paper by hand or typed to leave with nephews and nieces and other family an appreciation, a thank you for their life.
Absolutely. Yeah. Whether that's
Only to be distributed at your memorial service.
some of us work at writing memoirs as a way of working at that and doing life review. There are some tools for that nowadays, like I can't think of the one, but it's StoryCorps. There's some other things where you'll get a prompt every week to write something for your family. There are journals out there that you can buy and write. There's writing prompts in them. So that is a wonderful gift.
Pamela, on behalf of the class, we thank you for taking this topic very seriously, even for giving us something in writing to take home. And if you would pass along, please, the comment from all of the Sunday school classes. We appreciate very much our worship service. We think it could be a bit briefer and still be effective. And we hope that our ministers still believe in Christian education as well as worship. And thank you so much for passing that along. We're done.